My name is Jacob Peterson, and I'm 65 years old. The story I'm about to tell you is not about grief, it's about war. It began 1 week after I buried my wife of 40 years. My son and my daughter-in-law called an inheritance meeting. They sat across from me in the boardroom built on my sweat and my wife's soul and made their demand. My daughter-in-law Brenda smiled a smile colder than a Chicago winter and said, "Now that the old woman is gone, you'll sign the company over to my husband and learn to fend for yourself." I smiled right back. Because what she didn't know was that my lawyer was about to walk in not with a will, but with a single sealed envelope. A document that would unravel a 40-year-old secret and burn her entire world to the ground. If you believe that loyalty is earned, not inherited, hit that like button and subscribe because you're going to want to see how this ends. The appearance of Kenji Ishikawa was like dropping a block of ice into a glass of whiskey. The room, already cold, became glacial. Brenda shot him a look, a flicker of irritation crossing her perfectly made-up face. She hadn't anticipated him. This was supposed to be her ambush, a swift, clean strike against a grieving old man. Her voice was laced with sarcasm. "Kenji, what a surprise. I wasn't aware this family meeting required legal counsel." I kept my own voice flat, devoid of emotion. "This isn't a family meeting, Brenda. You just made that clear. This is business, and Kenji is the company's lawyer." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "He's always present for important business meetings." Kenji gave a professional nod, but said nothing. He placed his leather briefcase beside his chair, but remained standing, a silent, imposing presence. He knew his role right now was to be a witness. My son Ryan shifted in his seat, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Dad, what Brenda meant was—" Brenda cut him off without a second glance. "What I mean is perfectly clear, Ryan. Don't complicate it." She turned her focus back to me, her smile gone, replaced by the predatory look of a corporate raider. "Jake, let's be practical. Carol is gone. The heart of this company is gone. People need stability. The board, the investors, the employees. They need to see a clear line of succession. Ryan has been the COO for 10 years. This is the next logical step. It's what Carol would have wanted. For the company she built to stay with her son. Her legacy. Her legacy." She dared to use that word. She dared to invoke Carol's name to justify her own naked greed. A hot surge of anger coiled in my gut, but I pushed it down. To get angry now was to lose. Carol had taught me that. "Never let them see you sweat," she used to say. "Let them see you think." I looked at Ryan, my son. "Is that what you think, Ryan? You think your mother would want me to hand over everything she and I bled for, just a week after her funeral?" He swallowed hard, his eyes darting away from mine. I'm just thinking about the stability of the company, Dad. People are worried. Mom, she always said family came first." Yes, Carol always said family came first. But her definition of family was built on loyalty, respect, and hard work, not on lazy entitlement disguised as birthright. I looked at the two of them sitting there in their expensive clothes in the mahogany-paneled boardroom that cost more than the house Carol and I first bought. And a memory hit me so hard it almost knocked the wind out of me. Carol and I 40 years ago on the floor of our tiny rented apartment, spreading bills out on the carpet, trying to figure out how to pay them all. I remembered the smell of truck grease that never seemed to wash off from under my fingernails after a 16-hour day driving the one beat-up rig we owned. We bought it with a second mortgage on a house we could barely afford. Ryan's hands. They've never held anything heavier than a 5-iron. I took a deep breath, pulling myself back to the present. "Why the rush, Brenda?" I asked the question quietly. It seemed to throw her. She was expecting an argument, a fight, not a simple logical question. "It isn't a rush," she snapped back a little too quickly. "It's being decisive. The market doesn't wait for grief, Jake. Our competitors will see your hesitation as a weakness. We need a strong leader at the helm, not someone who's distracted." She said that last word with a disgusting amount of fake pity. Distracted. I raised an eyebrow. I was burying my wife. That's not a distraction, Brenda. It's called being human. You should try it sometime. The tension in the room crackled. Ryan looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Brenda's eyes narrowed. The mask was slipping. You know exactly what I mean. You're 65. You're tired. For the last few months while Carol was sick, you let things slide at the company. Everyone saw it. The performance reports don't lie. And there it was. Her trump card. She'd been gathering her ammunition. She'd been planning this for months, just waiting for the moment my wife took her last breath. The sheer coldness of it was breathtaking. I stood up, planting my palms flat on the gleaming surface of the table. I could feel the weight of 40 years in that wood. I have given my entire life to this company. I said, my voice low, but carrying to every corner of the room. I was here when it was one truck and a dream. I was here when we landed our first major contract. I was here when we almost went bankrupt in 2008. And I was here holding the hand of the woman who built this with me during her final days. And I don't regret a single second of it. I locked my eyes on Brenda's. I'm not going anywhere. I am the CEO and chairman of the board of Peterson Freight. Ryan will remain the COO. That is final. I turned to my lawyer. Thank you for coming, Kenji. It was a dismissal. Kenji nodded and began to pack his briefcase. Brenda shot up from her chair, her face flushed with rage. You can't do this. The board. I cut her off. I own 51% of the voting shares, Brenda. I am the board. This meeting is over. A dead silence fell. Brenda stared at me, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. Her confidence was gone, replaced by the raw fury of a predator who has had her kill snatched away. Fine, she hissed, her voice dripping venom. Play it that way, old man. We'll see how long you last when the board sees your latest performance reviews. You're a relic, Jake. And relics belong in a museum, not in the CEO's chair. With that, she turned on her heel and stormed out, dragging a stunned and silent Ryan behind her. The slam of the door echoed in the silence. I stood alone in the vast, empty room. The grief for my wife, a weight I thought couldn't get any heavier, was now compounded by the bitter taste of betrayal. I sank back into my chair, suddenly feeling every one of my 65 years. Brenda was right about one thing. I was tired. But she was wrong about everything else. I was no relic. And this wasn't the end. This was the beginning of a war. A war that Carol, in her own brilliant way, had already prepared me to win. I didn't go home after the meeting. I couldn't. The silence in that house, the house I had shared with Carol for 30 years, would have been too loud. Instead, I drove to a small, dimly lit coffee shop in a part of town Brenda wouldn't be caught dead in. It smelled of old books and burnt coffee. It was perfect. Start with any vendors or consultants who've been hired without my direct approval. Any new accounts that were opened in the last 18 months. I want to know who they're talking to, who they're paying. I leaned back, the vinyl of the booth creaking under my weight. Brenda thinks I'm a relic. She thinks I'm too lost in my grief to see what she's doing. I want you to use that. Let her think I'm weak. While she's planning her coronation, I want you to build her gallows. Kenji simply nodded, writing it all down. He didn't ask why. He didn't ask if I was sure. 20 years as my lawyer, he knew how I operated. He knew that when I gave an order like this, it was because the war had already begun. As I watched him make his notes, my mind drifted. Carol's face appeared in my memory, as clear as if she were sitting right next to me. I remembered a conversation we had about a year ago, sitting on our back porch, watching the sunset. I had just approved a new marketing initiative that Ryan and Brenda had pitched. I was proud of Ryan for taking the lead. But Carol had been quiet, a small, thoughtful frown on her face. "What is it, honey?" I had asked. She had looked at me, her eyes which could see right through anyone filled with a familiar worry. "It's Brenda," she had said softly. "I don't trust her, Jake." I had sighed. It was an old argument. "She's ambitious, Carol. That's a good thing. She pushes Ryan." Carol had shaken her head slowly. "No, it's more than ambition. She looks at Ryan and she doesn't see a husband. She sees a stock option. She looks at Peterson Freight and she doesn't see a family legacy. She sees a prize to be won." I had dismissed it at the time, told her she was being too harsh, that she was just being a protective mother. Now, sitting in that dingy coffee shop, her words echoed in my head with the force of a prophecy. She had seen it all. She had seen the vulture in Brenda long before I did. I had been blinded by my love for my son and my desire for a peaceful family. I see now she wasn't being harsh. She was being observant, and I had let her down by not listening. A wave of regret washed over me, so powerful it almost took my breath away. But regret wouldn't win this fight. Kenji looked up from his notebook, his expression serious. "I'll get started immediately, Jake. I'll be discreet. They won't see it coming." I gave him a grim nod. "Good," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "Make sure of it." This was for Carol. I would not let the woman who saw my son as a stock option inherit the empire my wife had helped me build. I would protect her legacy, even if it meant tearing my own family apart to do it. 3 days passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I went to the office. I signed papers. I sat in meetings and nodded at projections on a screen that meant nothing to me. Every face I saw was a question. Was this person loyal? Did they know what Brenda and Ryan were planning? The entire company, my life's work, suddenly felt like a hostile country. I was sleeping in my home office on a leather couch that smelled of old paper and Carol's faint perfume. I couldn't bear our bedroom. Not yet. On the 4th day, my phone rang. A private number. It was Kenji. His voice on the other end was stripped of all warmth, a flat, sterile instrument of fact. "Jake," he said, "I found something. It's bad." I sat up straight, my heart starting a slow, heavy drumbeat against my ribs. "How bad?" I asked, my own voice a low rasp. I heard the rustle of papers on his end. "It's a shell corporation. Registered in Delaware, of course. It's called B&R Consulting." B&R, Brenda and Ryan. The arrogance of it was like a slap in the face. They didn't even try to be clever. They were so sure I was a spent force, a sleeping lion they could rob without fear. My hand tightened on the phone, the plastic groaning in protest. "Go on," I said through clenched teeth. Kenji laid it out with the cold precision of a surgeon dissecting a tumor. For the past 22 months, B&R Consulting had been submitting monthly invoices to Peterson Freight. The charges were for vague, intangible services: market trend analysis, supply chain optimization reports, logistical strategy advisement. Each invoice was for an amount just under the threshold that would require my personal signature, an amount that Ryan, as chief operating officer, could approve on his own. My own son. He was the key that opened the vault. Kenji continued. "The reports they supposedly provided are non-existent. I checked with the department heads. They've never heard of B&R Consulting. They never received any such analysis. These were ghost services, Jake. Just a pipeline to drain money from the company." I closed my eyes, a wave of nausea rolling through me. It wasn't just greed. This was a profound betrayal, a meticulous long-term deception. While I was taking Carol to chemotherapy appointments, while I was holding her hand as she slept, they were writing fake invoices. They were stealing from her. From us. "How much, Kenji?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to know the number. I needed to know the exact price of their betrayal. There was a pause, and I could hear him take a breath. "The total amount paid from Peterson Freight to B&R Consulting over the last 22 months, He said each word a hammer blow is $812,450. The number hung in the air, obscene and monstrous. Over $800,000. A memory surfaced sharp and painful of Carol looking over a quarterly report about a year ago. She had a small frown on her face. "This consulting fee seems high, Jake," she had said, pointing to a line item. I had glanced at it, seen Ryan's signature, and dismissed it. "It's that new efficiency firm Ryan hired," I'd told her. "He says they're worth every penny." The shame of that moment burned in my throat now. She had seen it. Of course she had. She saw everything, and I hadn't listened. "Where did the money go?" I asked Kenji, my voice now cold as steel. The grief in my chest was beginning to crystallize into something harder, something sharper. "The B&R account is registered to a P.O. box," Kenji said. "But I traced the outflows. Large wire transfers. One was a down payment on a vacation home, a ski chalet in Aspen, Colorado. Another paid in full for a brand new Porsche 911. The car is registered in Brenda's name." Aspen. A Porsche. They weren't just stealing to build a nest egg. They were living a fantasy life on a foundation of lies funded by the company his mother had given her life to build. They were laughing at us. I stood up and walked to the window looking out over the city lights of Chicago. "I want more, Kenji," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is a good start. But I want everything. I want to know where every single dime went. I want the deed to the house, the title to the car, the credit card statements linked to the account. I want a timeline of every purchase they made with that stolen money. Get it all." "I'm already on it, Jake," he replied. "Consider it done." I hung up the phone and stood there for a long time watching the city breathe below me. The grief was still there, a cold stone in my chest. But now it had a new companion. A cold, clear, and righteous anger. The rules of engagement had changed. This was no longer a boardroom dispute. This was a crime scene, and I was done being the victim. The $800,000 was a body blow, but it wasn't the knockout punch. It was ugly, a straightforward case of embezzlement. But it felt incomplete. It felt like a symptom of a deeper disease. Brenda was greedy, yes. Ryan was weak, yes. But Carol had been suspicious before the stealing had gotten this bad. I remembered her frown a year ago. She wasn't just worried about consulting fees. She was worried about something more fundamental. The money explained Brenda's motive, but it didn't explain Carol's deep, quiet fear in her final months. I needed to understand what Carol knew, and Kenji, with all his financial trackers, couldn't find that. There was only one person left who had been inside that room with us, someone who had seen the unfiltered truth of our family's final days. Maria Sanchez, Carol's private nurse. I drove to her house in Pilsen, a small, neat brick bungalow on a street lined with families. It was a world away from the cold glass and steel of my downtown office. I found her in her small, immaculate garden, tending to her roses. When she saw me, her eyes, normally so bright, filled with a deep sadness. She was a woman of 60, with a kind face etched with laugh lines, but now those lines just looked tired. She wiped her hands on her apron and came to me, pulling me into a hug that felt more real than any I had received in weeks. "Jacob," she said, her voice thick. "I am so sorry for your loss. She was a light." We sat on her small porch drinking chamomile tea she insisted on making. For a few minutes, we just talked about Carol. Not the CEO, not the matriarch, but the woman. The woman who loved bad detective novels. The woman who hummed Frank Sinatra songs off-key when she was concentrating. The woman who knew the names of all Maria's grandchildren and asked about them every single day. "She adored you, Maria," I said, my own voice rough with an emotion I hadn't let myself feel in days. "You were more than her nurse. You were her best friend." Maria's eyes watered. She dabbed at them with a tissue. And she was mine, she whispered. In those last months, we talked about everything. Life, death, our children. She looked up, her gaze suddenly sharp. She was so proud of you, Jacob. How you built everything from nothing. But she was worried. My heart quickened. This was it. Worried? I prompted gently, not wanting to scare her off. About what? Maria hesitated, twisting the tissue in her hands. She looked down at her lap. She made me promise not to say anything. She did not want to cause you more pain. You were already carrying so much. Maria, I leaned forward, my hands clasping on the table between us. Whatever it is, I need to know. Brenda and Ryan, they are trying to take the company. They are saying I'm not fit to run it. They say it's what Carol would have wanted. Maria's head snapped up, her sadness replaced by a sudden fierce anger that took me by surprise. What? She gasped. That is a lie, a wicked lie. She clutched the cross around her neck. She was worried about them. She was worried about what they would do after she was gone. She was breathing hard now, her loyalty to Carol overriding any promise of silence. She changed in the last 2 months, Jacob. She became secretive. She started having private calls with your lawyer, Mr. Ishikawa. She would make me leave the room. She had me bring her old boxes from the attic. Company papers, ledgers, things from years and years ago. I thought she was just reminiscing. Maria's eyes filled with tears again. But it wasn't reminiscing. It was an investigation. She would sit up late with her magnifying glass going over these old documents. She would get so tired, but she wouldn't stop. She kept muttering, "It doesn't add up. It just doesn't add up." My blood ran cold. She had been investigating them. While she was dying, she was using the last of her strength to find the truth she felt, but couldn't yet prove. And, I pushed, did she find what she was looking for? Maria shook her head, her face a mask of confusion. I don't know, she never told me. But there is one more thing. She stood up, her expression suddenly fearful, as if she was breaking a sacred oath. She made me promise. She said, Maria, if anything happens, if they move against him, and if Jake ever needs to know the whole truth, I want you to give him this. She went inside her small house. I could hear her moving around, opening a drawer, her footsteps hesitant. She came back out a moment later. Her hand was clenched tight. She opened it and placed a single small tarnished key on the table between us. It wasn't a house key. It looked like a key to a safe deposit box. She told me, do not give it to him unless he is in trouble. He will be in pain. I don't want to add to it if I don't have to. But if he needs to fight, this will be his shield and his sword. Those were her exact words, Jacob. I stared at the key. It was so small, so insignificant. But I could feel the weight of it, the weight of my wife's love and her foresight. She hadn't just been suspicious. She had been planning. She had been laying a path for me, a set of breadcrumbs to follow from beyond the grave. The $800,000 was just the beginning. This key was the real story. She said you would know where it belongs, Maria whispered. She said it was to an old box she kept at the First National Bank downtown. A box she opened before you were even married. I picked up the key, its cold metal biting into my palm. A box from before our marriage. A secret Carol had kept for over 40 years. The fight wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a truth Carol had died protecting. And I was about to unearth it. Thank you, Maria, I said, my voice thick. You have no idea what you've done. She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. God bless you, Jacob. Now go, and fight for her. The next morning I was at the First National Bank on LaSalle Street right as it opened. The key felt heavy in my pocket, a small piece of metal that held the weight of an entire lifetime. I was led by a stern-looking woman in a navy blue suit into the vault. The air was cold, sterile, and silent, broken only by the sound of our footsteps on the marble floor and the mechanical click of the vault's massive circular door. She led me to a wall of brushed steel boxes and indicated a small one near the bottom. "This is box 31B, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It was opened in 1979. Before I even met Carol." A cold dread washed over me. What had she been hiding from me from the very beginning? I was left alone in a small private viewing room. Just me, a desk, a chair, and the heavy, cold metal box. My hands were trembling slightly as I took out the tarnished key. It fit perfectly. I inserted my own key from the bank, turned them both, and heard a satisfying heavy thunk. The lock was open. I pulled the long, narrow box out of its slot. It was heavier than I expected. I placed it on the desk and just stared at it for a moment. This was it. The sword and the shield. The whole truth that Carol was so afraid to burden me with. I lifted the lid. There was no velvet lining, no glittering jewels, no stacks of cash. It was just full of paper. Old yellowed paper that smelled of dust and time. My eyes scanned the contents, my heart hammering in my chest. At the top was a small, faded photograph of a young Carol, one I had never seen before, looking beautiful but impossibly sad. Beneath it, a bundle of letters tied with a faded silk ribbon. And under those two official-looking documents. I picked up the first one. It was a birth certificate. My breath hitched. The name on it was Ryan Peterson. My son. I ran my finger down the lines past his date of birth to the space for the parents' names. Father Jacob Peterson. And then I looked at the line for mother. The name written there in crisp typed ink was not Carol. It was a name from a life I had buried 45 years ago. A name I never ever thought I would see again. My blood turned to ice. It didn't make sense. And then I saw the second document. It was a set of adoption papers, dated 6 months later, legally transferring all parental rights of the child Ryan Peterson to one Carol Chenoweth. At the very bottom of the box, almost hidden, was a small leather-bound diary. I recognized Carol's handwriting on the first page, but it was the looping, hopeful script of a young woman I had just started to fall in love with. The fraud, the $800,000. All of it evaporated from my mind. This was the real secret. And I was about to read it in her own words. My hands were shaking. I opened the small leather-bound book. The first page was dated April 10th, 1983, just 2 months before we were supposed to get married. Her handwriting was the looping, hopeful script of the woman I was falling in love with. I started to read, and my world tilted on its axis. "I found out today," she wrote. "Jake, my Jake, the man I am going to build my life with, had a moment of weakness, a mistake, a stupid, drunken mistake 9 months ago that I could have forgiven. I could have screamed and cried, and we would have moved past it. But it's not just a mistake anymore. That mistake has a name. His name is Ryan. He has a child. With a woman from his past, a woman he swore meant nothing, a woman who showed up on his doorstep today holding a baby." I had to stop my breath catching in my throat. I remembered that day. The sheer animal panic. I had told Carol, but I hadn't told her everything. I had told her it was a lie, a shakedown. I had lied to her. I read on my shame a physical weight in my chest. He lied to me. The next entry read a few days later. The ink was darker, pressed harder into the page. He stood in our kitchen and lied to my face. He said she was desperate that the child wasn't his. But I saw his eyes. Jake is a terrible liar. I knew he was telling me what I wanted to hear, not what was true. So I did something I'm not proud of. I followed him. I followed him to a rundown apartment complex on the south side. I watched him hand her a wad of cash. And I saw her. The mother, she was broken, thin with eyes so hollow they looked like holes in her face. And then I saw the baby, him. Just a tiny thing in a dirty blanket. He wasn't just a mistake. He was a person. A tiny, innocent person. He's my son. He's Jake's son. And he's being raised in a place with no hope. I haven't slept in 3 days. The lie is sitting between us at the dinner table. But it's not the lie that's keeping me awake. It's the baby's face. I can't get it out of my head. My vision blurred. I had to wipe my eyes. I never knew. I never knew she had done that. I thought I had handled it, paid the woman off, and that she had disappeared. I was a fool. A young, arrogant fool. The next entry was a week later. I confronted him today. I told him I knew. I told him I knew Ryan was his son. I have never seen a man break like that. He fell apart right in front of me. He confessed everything. The shame, the stupidity, the fear. He was terrified of losing me. And in that moment, seeing him so broken, my anger just evaporated. It didn't disappear, it just changed. It turned into a terrible, heavy sadness. Because I had a choice to make. A choice that would define the rest of my life. I could leave. I could walk away from this man I loved, this man who had betrayed me, and I would be justified. Everyone would say I did the right thing. Or I could stay. I could forgive an unforgivable act. I could raise another woman's child as my own. I went to see her again, the mother. Without Jake. I went and I talked to her. She doesn't want him. Not really. She wants money. She wants a different life. She looked at this beautiful baby boy, and all she saw was a millstone around her neck. And in that moment I knew. He wasn't her son, he was mine. Today I made my choice. I sat Jake down. I told him my terms. We will adopt the child. We will pay the mother, and she will sign away her rights, and she will disappear forever. And Ryan will be our son. My son. We will raise him and love him and give him the life he deserves. But there is one condition. My one unbreakable condition. He will never ever know the truth. He will never know he is the product of my husband's greatest shame. He will only know that he is my son and that I love him. I am not doing this for Jake. I am not doing this for me. I am doing this for the boy. I am building our family on a foundation of forgiveness. I will make this our strength, not our weakness. I will love this child so fiercely that the lie becomes the truth. He will be my son. The pages that followed were a blur of legal meetings, adoption papers, and then joy. Entries about his first steps, his first word. Mama. She had circled it, underlining it 3 times. The diary was full of her love for him. A love so pure, so absolute, that I had never for 1 second in 40 years doubted it. She hadn't just adopted him. She had claimed him with a love more powerful than blood. I read for an hour, my hands tracing her script. Near the end, there was an entry from just 5 years ago, after Ryan and Brenda's wedding. Brenda, I don't know about this girl. There is something hard about her, something calculating. I see the way she looks at Ryan, not with love, but with ambition. Like he's a stepping stone. It worries me. He is a good boy, my boy, but he is soft. He has never had to fight for anything. I've made sure of that. Maybe I made him too soft. Maybe in protecting him from the truth, I forgot to teach him how to see it in others. I closed the book. My body was shaking, not with anger, but with a profound, earth-shattering awe. The woman I had loved for 40 years, the woman I had mourned for a week, was a giant. Her capacity for love, for forgiveness, was something I couldn't even comprehend. She hadn't just forgiven my betrayal. She had taken my greatest shame, my deepest secret, and she had transformed it into our family. She had built our entire life on an act of impossible grace. And now the very son she had saved, the son she had loved as her own, was siding with a woman who wanted to destroy everything she had built. The stealing the $800,000, it was all layered on top of this. A betrayal of a sacrifice I had never even known she'd made. I sat there, in the cold, silent vault, holding the diary to my chest. And for the first time since her funeral, I wept. I wept for her strength. I wept for my own blindness. And I wept for the son I was about to lose. I spent the next 2 days in a daze. The world outside my window moved on, but I was trapped in the cold, silent vault of the First National Bank, reading my wife's words over and over. Her diary sat on the mahogany desk in my home office, a silent testament to a 40-year-old act of love. I would pick it up, trace her handwriting with my fingertips, and try to comprehend the sheer scale of her sacrifice. The house no longer felt just empty. It was filled with the ghost of a truth I never knew existed. The doorbell rang on the third evening, a sharp, impatient sound that sliced through my quiet contemplation. I knew who it was before I even looked at the security camera. I opened the door and Brenda pushed past me without a word, her face a mask of thunder. Ryan followed her and looking like a teenager who had been dragged to the principal's office. "What the hell is this, Jake?" Brenda began spinning around to face me in the foyer. She didn't even bother with a greeting. My corporate American Express was declined. At Nordstrom. Rome, do you have any idea how humiliating that is? Ryan, looking miserable, chimed in. Dad, some of my accounts are frozen too. Kenji's office sent a memo. We can't approve the new fleet purchase. We can't even approve payroll for the West Coast Logistics Department. What is going on? Brenda sneered, taking a step closer. This is your little game, isn't it? You lost in the boardroom, so now you're going to burn the whole company down out of pure spite. Is this your grand plan, to drive Peterson Freight into the ground just so we can't have it? Carol would be disgusted by what you're doing to her memory. I just looked at them. I listened to her shrill accusations and I felt nothing. The anger I should have felt, the rage at her audacity, simply wasn't there. It had been burned away by the truth in that diary, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. I saw them not as villains, but as children. Ignorant children playing with matches in a house soaked in gasoline. I let her finish her tirade, letting the ugly words hang in the air between us, echoing in the high-ceilinged foyer that Carol had designed. When she finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving, I slowly turned my gaze from her and looked directly at Ryan. My son. The boy Carol had loved so fiercely, it reshaped her entire life. My voice when I spoke was quiet, but it seemed to command all the air in the room. I'm just protecting your mother's legacy. Brenda let out a short, incredulous laugh. Her legacy is the company, you senile old fool. I didn't look at her. I didn't even acknowledge she had spoken. I kept my eyes locked on Ryan. Her entire legacy, I repeated slowly, letting each word land with its own weight. The parts you know about, and the parts you don't. I let the silence stretch, letting the implications sink into the space between us. Then I delivered the blow, a question that was also a weapon. Are you sure you know what that legacy is, son? The effect was instantaneous. It was like I had spoken in 2 different languages at once. Brenda's face contorted, first in confusion, then in pure rage. What is that supposed to mean? Stop talking in riddles. What are you hiding? But Ryan didn't hear her. He just stared at me, his face suddenly pale. The word legacy had hit him in a way it couldn't hit Brenda. For her, it was a synonym for money and power. For him, it was about his mother. The woman who had read to him every night. The woman who had nursed him through the flu. The woman whose funeral he had just attended. My question had bypassed his greed and struck something deeper, something he couldn't name. A flicker of genuine doubt, perhaps even a pang of guilt, crossed his face. He was thinking about his mother, truly thinking about her, and he was realizing that he didn't have an answer to my question. I held his gaze for a moment longer. The accounts are under a temporary administrative review, I said, my voice now shifting to the cool, detached tone of a CEO. It is a standard procedure recommended by legal counsel to protect the company's assets during a period of leadership transition. It's just business. I turned and started walking back toward my office. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a lot of work to do. I left them standing there in the foyer, Brenda fuming and speechless, Ryan looking lost and utterly confused. I didn't need to show them the door. The power in the room had shifted completely and irrevocably. They hadn't come here and cornered a grieving widower. They had walked into a minefield they didn't even know existed. And I had just shown them the first tripwire. The psychological advantage I gained in the foyer was a foothold, but I knew Brenda wouldn't back down. She was like a cornered snake. She would only become more venomous. It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to set the trap. The next morning I sent the email. It was a work of art in corporate warfare. Brief, cold, and utterly official. It was a summons for an emergency meeting of the board of directors of Peterson Freight to be held in 24 hours. The agenda item was listed simply as a review of executive operational conduct and fiduciary responsibilities. It was a declaration of war. I could picture Brenda reading it, a triumphant smirk spreading across her face. She would see it as a sign of weakness, the last desperate move of a cornered king. She'd think I was foolish enough to fight her on her own turf in front of the very people she'd likely been poisoning against me for months. She would spend the next day preparing her arguments, marshalling her performance reports, ready to paint me as an emotional, grieving relic unable to lead. She would be preparing for a boardroom brawl. She had no idea she was walking into an ambush. The morning of the meeting, I chose my suit with care. A dark charcoal suit Carol had bought for me on our 35th anniversary. She said it made me look powerful. Today, I needed that power. As I knotted my tie, I didn't see a tired, grieving man in the mirror. I saw a soldier. I wasn't dressing for a meeting. I was putting on armor. I was in the boardroom a full hour early. I watched them on the security feed as they walked through the lobby of the building I had built. Brenda led the way, her stride brisk and confident, a shark gliding through familiar waters. She was smiling, nodding at employees performing the role of the queen-in-waiting. Ryan trailed a half step behind her, his expression a familiar mixture of anxiety and borrowed arrogance. He looked like a man being led to a battle he wasn't sure he could win but was too afraid to question his general. When they entered the boardroom, the low chatter from the other 4 board members died instantly. I was already seated at the head of the table, my place. Kenji was to my right, his briefcase open, a neat stack of 6 thick, spiral-bound folders placed precisely in front of him. Each folder was a nail for their coffin. Brenda's confident smile faltered for just a fraction of a second as she took in the scene. The room was cold. The atmosphere was sterile. This wasn't the chaotic, emotional confrontation she had prepared for. This was a clinical, organized proceeding. She looked at me, a question in her eyes. I met her gaze with a calm, unreadable expression. She and Ryan took their seats. They thought they were here to stage a coup. They didn't know it yet, but the meeting wasn't a debate. It was a sentencing. I let the silence in the room stretch for a full 10 seconds. I stared at the polished table, then slowly raised my eyes. I looked at each board member one by one. Mike Sullivan, who'd been my first ever driver, and now ran our entire West Coast operations. Sarah Jenkins, our CFO for 20 years, a woman so sharp she could find a rounding error in the federal budget. David Lee and Tom Fletcher, 2 of our earliest investors who had believed in Carol and me when we were nothing. These were not just board members. They were family. Or so I had thought. Finally, I looked at Brenda. You wanted this meeting. I began, my voice quiet but firm. You've been telling people I'm not fit to lead, that I'm distracted, that I'm a relic. You believe it's time for a change. So please, Brenda, the floor is yours. Tell us all what you think. It was a trap. She swam right into it. She straightened her spine, gave a sympathetic, rehearsed look to the other board members, and launched her prepared speech. Thank you, Jake. And I want to say we are all grieving with you. Carol was the heart of this company, which is why this is so difficult. She proceeded to lay out for nearly 10 minutes a case built on half-truths and corporate buzzwords. She pointed to missed meetings I'd missed, to be at Carol's bedside. She highlighted delayed decisions I'd postponed, to focus on my wife's final days. She painted a picture of a company adrift, led by a man lost in the past, a man who had lost his edge. We need a strong, clear-eyed leader to guide us forward, she concluded, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Ryan's arm. Ryan has the vision, he has the drive, and it's what Carol would have wanted. The room was heavy with the implication. The other board members looked uncomfortable, glancing at me, then at their notes. Ryan sat there preening under her praise, a puppet king. Brenda smiled triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought the debate was about my competence. I let her smile hang in the air for a moment. Then I turned to Kenji. Kenji, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. You have the floor. Brenda's smile vanished. What is this? This is a board matter, not a legal one. This, I said, leaning forward, is entirely a legal matter. Kenji stood up. He opened the 6 thick, spiral-bound folders. Good morning, he said, his voice as neutral as a judge's. I've prepared a brief for each of you. This is the result of a 2-week internal audit commissioned by the CEO. He slid a folder in front of each board member. He gave one to Ryan. He gave one to Brenda. If you'll please turn to page 1, and I would also direct your attention to the main screen. The projector flickered on. The first image was a simple logo, a stylized B and R intertwined. Below it the words B&R Consulting LLC. Brenda's face went rigid. It was a fractional change, a tightening around her eyes, but I saw it. Ryan, however, went visibly pale. He looked at the screen, then at the folder, then at me, his eyes wide with a dawning animal panic. B&R Consulting, Kenji began, is a limited liability corporation registered in Delaware 22 months ago. He clicked to the next slide. It was the registration document. The registered agents and sole proprietors, he continued, are Brenda Peterson and Ryan Peterson. Sarah Jenkins, our CFO, let out a small, sharp breath. Kenji, what is this? Please turn to page 3, Kenji said, his voice unwavering. What you are looking at is the first of 22 invoices submitted by B&R Consulting to Peterson Freight. The screen filled with an invoice for $45,000. The service rendered logistical strategy advisement. As you'll note, Kenji said, the amount is just under the $50,000 threshold that requires a sign-off from the CEO, an amount that can be approved solely by the COO. He clicked. The next invoice, $42,000. Market trend analysis. Click. $48,000. Supply chain optimization report. Click. 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 For 5 solid minutes, Kenji clicked through invoice after invoice, all for vague, intangible services, all signed and approved with Ryan's digital signature. Mr. Sullivan, Kenji said, looking at Mike, our head of operations. Did you ever receive a supply chain optimization report from B&R Consulting? Mike shook his head, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. Never heard of him, he growled. Mrs. Jenkins, Kenji turned to our CFO. Did our marketing department receive any market trend analysis from this entity? Sarah was already flipping through her own copy of the report, her face pale. No, she said, her voice shaking with rage. This is fraud. But where did the money go? Tom Fletcher, one of the investors, asked. Please turn to section 4, Kenji said. The money trail. This was it. The kill shot. Kenji projected a bank statement from B&R Consulting. It showed the inflows from Peterson Freight, and then the outflows. Exhibit A, Kenji said, A wire transfer for $250,000 dated March 12th of this year. He clicked. The next slide was a property deed. That transfer was a down payment on this. A 5-bedroom ski chalet in Aspen, Colorado. The property is deeded solely in the name of Brenda Peterson. Brenda shot to her feet. This is an outrage that was a legitimate real estate investment. This is private financial information. It was purchased with stolen company funds, Kenji stated flatly, not raising his voice, which makes it company business. He clicked again. Exhibit B, a wire transfer for $160,000 dated June 1st. The next slide, a vehicle registration. Payment in full for a 2023 Porsche 911. The vehicle is registered, also to Brenda Peterson. You son of a... Mike Sullivan started to rise, his fists clenched. I put a hand on his arm and he sank back into his chair, breathing like an angry bull. Brenda was losing it. Her face was flushed, her voice shrill. Those were performance bonuses, compensation for our consulting work. Ryan approved them. It's all perfectly legal. Was it legal, Mrs. Peterson? Kenji asked, his voice suddenly sharp. When you used the funds to pay off over $75,000 in personal credit card debt. He clicked again. Amex statements. Neiman Marcus. Cartier. And finally, Exhibit C. The remaining balance of the B&R consulting account, $402,000, was transferred 2 days ago, the day after our last meeting, into this private high-yield savings account. He projected the account statement. Jointly owned. Ryan Peterson and Brenda Peterson. Kenji let the image hang on the screen. Then he put up the final slide. It was just a number in a large black font. $812,450. This is... David Lee, the investor, was speechless. He just stared at Ryan. Ryan had completely crumbled. He wasn't even looking at the screen. He was white as a sheet, his hands visibly trembling. He looked like a child. It was consulting, he stammered, his voice cracking. Brenda said it was... She said it was standard. A management fee. She handled all of it. You signed the approvals, Ryan. Sarah Jenkins hissed, her voice dripping with contempt. You signed every single one. Brenda, seeing her puppet fall apart, tried one last time. She pointed a shaking finger at me. He's doing this. He's twisting it. He's a vindictive old man, and he's trying to frame us because he's lost his mind. He's grieving. He's incompetent. All eyes turned to me. I had been silent for the entire presentation. I sat there letting her accusation hang in the air. I looked at the number on the screen. $800,000. I looked at my son, who couldn't even meet my eyes. Then I looked at her, my daughter-in-law, her face a grotesque mask of rage and panic. I leaned forward, my hands clasping on the table, and I spoke, my voice low, filled with a cold, clear sadness that was more terrifying than any shout. You are correct about one thing, Brenda. I was grieving. I paused, letting the room hold its breath. Kenji, can you please go back to the timeline of the invoices? Kenji clicked. The dates popped up. March, April, May, June, July. While my wife, I said, my voice dropping, was in a hospital bed learning she had weeks to live, you were writing invoices for market trend analysis. I pointed to the April transfer. While I was holding her hand, listening to her tell me she was scared. You were wiring a down payment for your house in Aspen. I pointed to the June invoice. And in the week we brought her home for hospice. The week I didn't sleep. The week I sat by her side and watched the strongest person I have ever known fade away. You were signing off on a check for your new Porsche. I stood up. The room was deathly silent. Even Brenda was speechless, her mouth half open, the blood draining from her face. I looked at Ryan. This, I said, my voice thick with a grief he couldn't possibly understand, is the legacy you were trying to protect. My words fell into a silence so profound, it was like a physical weight. Every person in that room was frozen. Mike Sullivan was staring at his own clenched fists on the table, his knuckles white. Sarah Jenkins had her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust fixed on Ryan. David Lee and Tom Fletcher, the investors, just looked stunned, as if they couldn't process the sheer cold-blooded treachery. Brenda stood there, her mouth still half open, her face pale. The mask of the powerful executive was gone, replaced by the naked, ugly face of a common thief caught in the act. And Ryan, my son. He finally looked up at me, his eyes streaming with tears. He didn't look like a 40-year-old COO. He looked like he was 5, a little boy who had just broken his mother's favorite vase and knew he was in terrible, terrible trouble. "Dad," he whispered the word, a pathetic squeak. I didn't know. I didn't know about the dates. She handled everything. I just signed. Brenda, seeing him crumble, seemed to snap back to life. But her rage was gone, replaced by a desperate, frantic panic. She turned on him, her voice a venomous hiss. "You knew! You weak, pathetic fool, you knew! You loved the money, you loved the car I bought you! Don't you dare put this on me!" I didn't, he cried, covering his face with his hands, sobbing openly now. I thought it was just bonuses." It was a pathetic, disgusting spectacle. A husband and wife tearing each other apart to avoid the falling blade. I had seen enough. "That is enough," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through their frantic whispers like a scalpel. They both fell silent. I looked at the board members. "You have seen the evidence presented by Mr. Ishikawa. You have heard the testimony. The facts are clear. $812,450 of company funds were fraudulently transferred to a shell corporation owned by the chief operating officer and his wife." I turned my gaze back to Ryan, his face still buried in his hands. "As chairman of this board, I am now calling for a vote. I will make 3 motions." Mike Sullivan slammed his open palm on the table, making the water glasses jump. "A vote," he growled, his face purple with rage. "Jake, to hell with a vote. Let me throw them out myself. This is a disgrace to Carol's memory. A disgrace." "Mike," I said, holding up a hand, "everything will be done by the book. Everything will be official. This is how we restore order." I looked at Sarah Jenkins. "Sarah, do you have anything to say before I proceed?" She took a shaky breath, removing her hand from her mouth. She looked directly at Ryan. "I helped hire you, Ryan," she said, her voice trembling with a cold fury. "I watched you grow up. Carol was so proud of you. She bragged about you. She bragged about your MBA, about how smart you were." She shook her head, her eyes welling with tears of anger. What you've done, it's not just theft, it's desecration. You let this woman," she spat the word, glancing at Brenda, "lead you by the nose into robbing your own mother's legacy. While she was dying. God, Ryan, how do you live with yourself?" Ryan just wept harder, his shoulders shaking. I stood tall. "Motion 1, I said, my voice resin. "Type. I move that the board immediately terminate the employment of Ryan Peterson for gross misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, and corporate fraud, effective immediately." "I second the motion." "Oh," Mike Sullivan roared before I had even finished the sentence. "All in favor," I said. Every hand in the room besides Ryan's and Brenda's shot into the air. "Opposed?" I asked into the silence. Brenda just stared at me, her eyes dead. "The motion passes unanimously. Ryan Peterson is no longer an employee of Peterson Freight." I didn't pause. Motion 2. I move that the board immediately and permanently bar Brenda Peterson from all Peterson Freight properties and that all her corporate accounts and access privileges be revoked effective immediately. Second, said Sarah Jenkins, her voice like ice. All in favor. Again, every hand went up. The motion passes unanimously. Brenda looked like she had been struck. She understood what I was doing. This wasn't just a firing. This was an excommunication. Finally, I said. Motion 3. I move that the board authorize our legal counsel, Mr. Kenji Ishikawa, to pursue all available civil and criminal charges against Ryan Peterson and Brenda Peterson to recover the $812,450 plus damages and to cooperate fully with the district attorney's office in their inevitable prosecution. I second it, said Tom Fletcher, the investor, his face grim. All in favor. Every hand went up. The motion passes unanimously. It was done. In less than 3 minutes, their lives as they knew them were over. Brenda was staring at me, her face a blank mask of shock. The reality of what had just happened was crashing down on her. The money, the house, the car, the charges, the jail time. Ryan was still just crying. A broken 40-year-old child. I pressed a small button on the console in front of me. It buzzed the security desk in the lobby. Kenji, I said, please hand over the evidence binders to the security officers when they arrive. They will escort Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Peterson from the building. The door opened, and 2 uniformed security officers stepped inside. They were large men, and their presence suddenly made the room feel very small, very real. Jake, Dad, please, Ryan whispered, looking up at me, his face a mess of tears and snot. Please don't do this. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I looked at him. My son. The boy Carol had saved. The boy I had raised. And I felt a vast, empty ocean of pity and disgust. Sorry doesn't bring back the money, Ryan. I said, my voice flat. And it damn sure doesn't honor your mother's memory. You made your choice. You signed the papers. I nodded to the guards. They are no longer employees or guests. Please see them out. One guard stepped toward Ryan and the other toward Brenda. Brenda, in a final pathetic burst of defiance, snatched her purse. You don't have to touch me, I'll walk, she spat. She strode out of the room, her head held high, a queen in a fantasy of her own making, even in her absolute defeat. Ryan, however, couldn't even stand. The guard had to gently but firmly lift him by the arm. Dad, he cried out, one last desperate plea. I turned my back to him. I couldn't look at him. I faced the window looking out over the city Carol and I had built. I heard him being led out, his sobs echoing down the hall until the heavy boardroom door clicked shut, sealing them out of my life, out of her company forever. The disarmament was complete. After the heavy door clicked shut, the silence that flooded the boardroom was absolute. It was a vacuum heavier and more profound than the silence of my empty home. The other board members, Mike, Sarah, David, and Tom, had filed out quietly one by one, each placing a hand on my shoulder as they passed. They offered their support, their faces grim, their eyes full of a shared sense of violation. Kenji was efficiently packing the remaining binders into his briefcase, a quiet professional who had just detonated a bomb and was now cleaning up the debris. But I just sat there, at the head of the table that had been mine for 40 years. I stared at the empty chair where Ryan had sat, at the overturned water glass he'd knocked over in his panic. I felt no triumph. There was no surge of victory, just a vast, cold emptiness and a profound, bone-deep weariness. I looked at the number still glowing on the projector screen. $812,450. It was a massive sum, but it felt insignificant. I looked at the timeline of the invoices. March, April, May, June. And suddenly, it all clicked into place, not as a random series of thefts, but as a meticulously laid path of breadcrumbs. Carol. This wasn't my counteroffensive. It was hers. Every single step I had taken in the last 2 weeks, I realized I hadn't been walking alone. I had been following a map she had drawn for me, her strange, secretive calls to Kenji in her final months, her request for Maria to bring her old ledgers and company papers from the attic, her casual throwaway comment a year ago about the consulting fees being high, her warning to me, the one I had dismissed, that Brenda saw Ryan as a stock option. She had seen it. She had seen the rot long before I did. She knew she was dying. She knew I would be blinded by my grief. And she knew better than anyone that my love for Ryan was a weakness Brenda would exploit. So in the last precious months of her life, while her body was failing her, her mind, that brilliant, sharp, incredible mind, was working overtime. She wasn't just reminiscing over old papers. She was building a case. She was laying the groundwork. She was gathering the ammunition, putting it into a box, and leaving the key with Maria. She was preparing me for the war she knew was coming, a war I would have to fight without her. This audit the evidence Kenji found. He hadn't started from scratch. He was just following the map she had left behind. She had cleaned up my mess one last time. She had armed me from the grave. I looked at her empty chair next to mine and I finally understood. I wasn't avenging her. I was just finishing the job she had started. The call didn't come from me. It came from Kenji. A week after the board meeting, a week of deafening, suffocating silence, he contacted their new and presumably very expensive lawyer. He proposed a meeting. A final opportunity. His email read, to discuss the separation terms and the pending civil litigation. It was a perfectly baited trap, and I knew Brenda would swim right into it. I knew exactly how her mind worked. She was a transactional creature. To her, everything was a negotiation. She would see this as a lifeline. She'd be convinced that I wouldn't really want the humiliation of a public criminal trial. Father sues son for embezzlement. The headlines would be terrible for the Peterson Freight brand. She would think she was coming to barter. She would trade her silence for my mercy. She would try to leverage her marriage to Ryan, her status as the mother of my grandson, to avoid jail time, and maybe, just maybe, walk away with some kind of severance. She still thought this was about the $800,000. She still believed she had a card left to play. And Ryan would just be there, a hollowed-out shell dragged along by her desperate, frantic hope. Kenji's office was on the 50th floor, a glass box of steel and gray marble that overlooked the Chicago River. It was nothing like my warm, mahogany-paneled office. This place was cold, sterile, and impartial, the perfect, unforgiving setting for what was about to happen. I was already seated at the head of the long glass conference table when they were shown in. Kenji sat to my right, his posture as rigid as the skyline behind him. The door opened. They looked diminished. The week had not been kind. Brenda's usual designer power suit was replaced by something less sharp, something that looked store-bought. Her makeup was applied a little too thickly, a brittle mask of defiance painted over a base of pure animal panic. Ryan was worse. He looked like a ghost. He was unshaven, his eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, and he wouldn't look at me. He just shuffled in and collapsed into the chair furthest from me, as if trying to make himself small to disappear into the expensive upholstery. Brenda, however, arched right up to the table and dropped her purse on it with a loud thwack. "All right, Jake," she said. Her voice was brittle, forcing a strength she clearly no longer possessed. "You've had your fun. You humiliated us. You've made your point. Are you finally ready to be reasonable?" She tried to muster a sneer. "What's the offer? We won't go to trial. We'll sign a non-disclosure. We'll figure out a payment plan for the money. What's it going to take to make this go away?" I just looked at her. I felt nothing. No anger, no hate. Just a deep, profound pity for her complete and total blindness. She was still trying to haggle over the price of a used car, not realizing she was standing on a gallows. "There is no offer, Mrs. Peterson," Kenji said, his voice cutting through her bluster. "This is not a negotiation." Brenda's forced confidence wavered. "Then what is this?" She snapped, her voice rising in pitch. One last chance to gloat. One final round of humiliation before you send your own son to prison. I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. This isn't about the money you stole, Brenda. That's a separate matter. A matter for the district attorney. I nodded to Kenji, who placed a single new blue-bound folder on the table. This is about the will. Her face, which had been a mask of false bravado, finally crumpled into genuine raw confusion. The will, Carol's will. It was simple. We heard it was simple. Everything went to you. I looked at her, and for the first time I think she saw the man I had become in the last 2 weeks. That, I said, is what you were meant to believe. Kenji, please begin. Kenji took a pair of simple black-framed reading glasses from his breast pocket. It was a deliberate, methodical gesture, the kind of small action that suddenly commands the entire room. He put them on. He opened the blue-bound folder. The sound of the thick, expensive paper turning was unnaturally loud in the pressurized silence of the office. He did not look at Brenda. He did not look at Ryan. He looked only at the document. This, he began, his voice a flat, unemotional monotone, is the last will and testament of Carol Chenoweth Peterson. It was executed on August 14th of this year. Ryan, who had been staring at his own hands, looked up. His hollow eyes finally showed a flicker of confusion. August, he whispered. That was 2 months before she... Brenda's eyes narrowed. 2 months, she repeated, her voice sharp. She signed a new will 2 months ago. I watched the gears turning in her head. She was recalculating. A new will signed while she was sick. She was probably thinking Carol had cut me out or given everything to charity in a fit of emotion. Her mind couldn't even conceive of the truth. This document, Kenji continued as if they hadn't spoken, revokes all previous wills and testaments in their entirety. I will, with your permission, skip the preliminary articles regarding the disposition of personal effects and move directly to the primary articles concerning the major assets. Get on with it, Brenda snapped. Kenji turned a page. Article 3. All personal liquid assets, including, but not limited to, all bank accounts, money market accounts, and stock portfolios held solely in the name of Carol Chenoweth Peterson. I bequeath in full to my beloved husband, Jacob Peterson. Brenda let out a small, almost triumphant sigh of relief. She visibly relaxed in her chair. See, she said, forcing a smile at Ryan. It's the same. It all goes to Jake. So what is this? What's the point of this drama, Jake? I said nothing. I just waited. I knew what was coming. Kenji held up a single finger, a silent command for her to be quiet. Please, Mrs. Peterson, I have not finished. His voice was like a chip of ice. That was Article 3. We are now on Article 4. This article, he said, pausing to look over his glasses at her, concerns my client's controlling interest in Peterson Freight Incorporated. Specifically, the 51% of voting shares she inherited from her father, Mr. David Chenoweth, and which are, as stipulated by her prenuptial agreement with Mr. Peterson, her sole and separate property. Brenda's smile vanished. Her head tilted. Her separate property. I could hear the cold dread in her voice. The $800,000 had been stolen from the company. But this was Carol's personal stake. A stake that was by law completely untouchable by me or by Ryan. What about the company? She stammered. Kenji looked back down at the page. Article 4, Section A. All shares mentioned are to be placed into a newly formed entity upon my death, to be named the Peterson Legacy Trust. He read through a dense paragraph of legal jargon describing the trust's structure, its fiduciaries, its tax implications. Brenda was fidgeting, her panic rising. Get to the point, she almost yelled. Kenji turned the final page of the document. I am at the point, Mrs. Peterson. I am at Article 4, Section B. He paused again, a long, agonizing silence. It is, he said, what my client referred to as the bloodline clause. The what clause? Brenda's voice was a high-pitched squeak. Kenji raised his voice slightly, as if he were addressing a courtroom, and he read very, very slowly, enunciating every single syllable. The controlling interest of Peterson Freight, the aforementioned 51%, shall only be transferred in part or in full from the Peterson Legacy Trust to an heir or heirs who can provide definitive biological and genetic proof of being of my direct bloodline. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Ryan just sat there, his face a complete blank, the words not computing. He was too slow, too insulated from reality to grasp the implication. But Brenda was different. Her face was a storm of rapid conflicting emotions, confusion, fear, and then a sudden desperate realization. She looked at Kenji. She looked at me. She looked at Ryan. And then she let out a short, barking, ugly laugh. A bloodline clause. What is this Game of Thrones that's just Ryan, it's just a fancy vindictive legal way of saying, it goes to her son, our son. She was nodding, reassuring herself. Right, Jake. She looked at me, desperate for confirmation. This is just another sick, twisted game. You're trying to scare us. She turned on Kenji. So what? You want a blood test? Fine, get a needle. We'll do it right now. Ryan is her son. He's her only child. This is meaningless. It's just... I watched her, this rabid animal, still fighting, still clawing, still trying to make the facts fit her narrative. She was standing on a trapdoor and arguing about the color of the paint. I let her rant for another 10 seconds, her voice growing more shrill, more hysterical. She still thought she was safe. She still thought the man sitting next to her, the man she had used as a key to the vault, was Carol's son. Kenji just waited, his expression unreadable. When she finally ran out of breath, her chest heaving, he spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. As you wish, Mrs. Peterson. He reached down to the briefcase by his feet. The one I had assumed was now empty. He pulled out a single thick, sealed manila envelope, the same envelope I had seen in the boardroom. He placed it on the glass table with a soft, definitive thud. Mrs. Peterson, he said, was a very thorough woman. She anticipated this contingency. She also anticipated the results. Brenda's laugh was high-pitched and brittle, a sound on the verge of shattering. Anticipated? What did she leave? A sworn statement? A lock of his baby hair? This is insane. Ryan is her son. Kenji's face remained an impassive mask. He didn't respond to her hysteria. He simply, and very deliberately, broke the seal on the manila envelope. He reached inside and pulled out a single folded document. A lab report. As I said, Kenji continued, his voice cutting cleanly through her rising panic. Mrs. Peterson was a very thorough woman. In her final weeks, she was concerned about the company's future. She was concerned about discrepancies. She authorized, as part of her estate, planning a full genetic audit of her direct lineage. She provided her own sample, of course. He then turned his gaze cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel directly to Ryan. And Ryan, she requested a sample from you as well. Do you recall about 3 months ago when your mother insisted you have a full executive physical at Northwestern? She was so worried about your health, she said. Ryan, who had been a ghost in the chair, blinked. My physical. With Dr. Evans, yes. She said she was worried about my cholesterol. Indeed, Kenji said. She was. She also, under a private medical directive, had the lab run a full comparative DNA panel against her own sample. She wanted to confirm her legacy, to ensure the bloodline clause was ironclad. Kenji unfolded the paper. This, he said, holding it up, is the result of that comparative panel from Northwestern Memorial Hospital's certified genetics lab. He didn't need to read the whole thing. He just read the summary. His voice was flat, devoid of any drama, which only made the words more devastating. Conclusion, he read. The sample provided by Mr. Ryan Peterson and the sample provided by Mrs. Tusha, Carol Peterson, shows 0 common genetic markers consistent with a mother-son relationship. The probability of maternity is 0.00%. The world stopped. Ryan just stared. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air, his mind completely unable to process the words. He looked at me, his eyes wide, begging me to say it wasn't true. Brenda's face went completely, terrifyingly blank. The rapid calculations, the anger, the fear, it all vanished, replaced by a void. She looked from Kenji to the paper to Ryan, and then to me. "What?" she whispered. It was the smallest, most terrified sound I had ever heard her make. What does that mean?" I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the glass table. And for the first time I let the full weight of my grief, my betrayal, and my pity show in my voice. "It means," I said, looking right at her, "that he isn't her son." But Brenda's mind was racing, trying to find a foothold. "But he's your son, so you had an affair." She was grasping at straws, trying to find a scenario that still made sense. "You cheated on Carol?" "Yes," I said. My voice was a low rasp. "I did. Once. A long time ago. Before we were even married. A stupid, drunken mistake I made 45 years ago." I looked at Ryan, my son, whose entire world was disintegrating in real time. "Your biological mother, she didn't want you. She wanted money. I paid her. I thought that was the end of it." I turned my gaze back to Brenda, whose face was now a mask of pure, horrified confusion. "But Carol," I said, my voice thick with an awe she could never comprehend. "Carol knew, she knew the truth, and she forgave me. She went and she found him. She legally adopted him. She raised him. She loved him. My God, she loved him more fiercely than any mother I have ever known. She loved him as her own. She made him her son in every way that mattered. But," and here my voice turned to cold steel, "she couldn't make him her blood. And her will, the will she wrote, is based on blood, not on love." The finality of it hit Brenda like a physical blow. She staggered back, clutching the table. "No," she whispered. "No. So he gets nothing. The company. He gets nothing. He gets nothing from her trust," Kenji stated flatly. "Then who?" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking into a hysterical scream. "Who gets it? If not Ryan, then who? Did she have another kid? A secret kid?" Her laugh was a raw, broken sound. "This is insane. There is no one else." I just looked at her. I looked at my broken son, who was rocking back and forth, whispering, "No, no, no," to himself. I had dreaded this moment. I had dreaded this pain. But Carol had known. She had planned for this too. She had known that the truth in all its devastating, cleansing power was the only way. "You're right, Brenda," I said, my voice quiet again. "He wasn't her only child." Brenda froze. Her eyes snapped to mine. "What?" The door to the conference room opened. It hadn't been locked. Kenji had arranged for this. A woman stepped in. She was in her early 40s, perhaps 42, 43. She was tall, with an air of quiet, professional confidence. She had dark hair, a kind, intelligent face, and my breath hitched. She had Carol's eyes, the same shape, the same depth, the same piercing intelligence. She was dressed not in a power suit, but in the practical, no-nonsense green scrubs of a doctor, a white lab coat thrown over them, a stethoscope draped around her neck. She looked like she had just come from a hospital floor. She looked at me, at Kenji, and then at the two broken people at the table, her expression one of polite professional curiosity mixed with a deep underlying sadness. Brenda stared at her. "Who the hell are you, Timout? This is a private meeting." Kenji stood up. "Brenda Peterson, Ryan Peterson," he said, his voice taking on a formal tone of introduction. "Allow me to present Dr. Ann Wallace. She is a double-board certified cardiothoracic surgeon currently on staff at the University of Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia." He paused, letting the title settle in the air. Then he delivered the final killing blow. "She is also," he said, gesturing to the doctor, "the biological daughter of Carol Chenoweth Peterson. The child she gave up for adoption when she was 19 years old, long before she ever met you, Jake. And as of this morning, the sole verified biological heir to the Peterson Legacy Trust. She is the new owner of 51% of Peterson Freight." The name hung in the air, a final unanswerable fact. Dr. Ann Wallace. Carol's daughter. The true heir. Brenda's face, which had been a mask of raw confusion, crumpled. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow-motion collapse. Her mouth opened and closed, but the shrill, demanding voice was gone. All that came out was a small, dry gasp, like a burst of dust. She looked at Dr. Wallace, this calm, intelligent woman in her scrubs, and her mind simply broke. The intricate web of lies, of manipulations, of long-term planning, of entitlement, it all tore apart in a single instant. This woman's very existence was a reality Brenda could not fit into her world. "No," she whispered. It wasn't a denial. It was a plea for the world to make sense again. "No, you're lying. This is a trick. Jake, you hired her." She pointed a shaking finger at Anne. "She's an actress. You hired an actress. This is conspiracy. It's fraud." Her voice climbed the scale, becoming high and thin, the sound of a violin string stretched to its breaking point. "We'll sue you. We'll sue all of you. We'll demand a test. That won't be necessary, Mrs. Peterson," Kenji said, his voice quiet, but laced with the cold finality of an executioner. "Dr. Wallace was located by Mrs. Peterson herself over 6 months ago. They met. They reconciled. And they coordinated this entire transition of legacy. The DNA confirming Dr. Wallace as Carol's biological daughter has already been certified and is appended to the will. It is ironclad. There is nothing to fight." That was the last blow. The word ironclad. Brenda's wild-eyed panic just deflated. All the fight, all the venom, all the ambition that had defined her entire being evaporated in a single ragged exhale. She sank into her chair, not sitting, but collapsing, as if her bones had turned to jelly. She put her head in her hands, her shoulders starting to shake. But this wasn't the sound of grief. It was the dry, ugly, racking sob of pure, absolute loss. The sound of a gambler who had bet everything on a sure thing only to watch the house take it all. She had lost the money. She had lost the company. She had lost her future. She was nothing. And Ryan, my son. He hadn't moved. He hadn't reacted to Dr. Wallace's entrance at all. He was still locked in that first moment of devastation, the moment he learned the woman he worshipped wasn't his mother. He was just gone. He was rocking back and forth in his expensive chair, his eyes wide and unseeing, staring at the glass wall behind me. He was whispering, but not to us, to himself. She wasn't my mom. It wasn't real. He was a 40-year-old man, a COO, a husband. And in that moment, he was just a terrified little boy, lost in a forest he didn't understand. His world hadn't just been taken from him. It had been revealed as a lie he had lived for 40 years. Brenda had lost her fortune. Ryan had lost his very soul. They were destroyed and the war was over. The aftermath was not swift, but it was absolute. Justice, I've learned, is not a lightning bolt. It is a slow, grinding machine. The civil suit to recover the stolen $800,000 was a given. Kenji filed it before Brenda and Ryan had even left the parking garage. But that was just the beginning. As promised, Kenji turned over the entire meticulously prepared case to the district attorney's office. Criminal charges were filed within the month: grand larceny conspiracy to defraud and multiple counts of wire fraud. Faced with prison time and with every bank account frozen, Brenda's true nature took over. There was no loyalty. There was no us. She turned on Ryan with the savagery of a cornered animal, filing for divorce, immediately claiming she was the victim, coerced by a weak-willed husband. Their divorce was a short, ugly war between two drowning rats, ending with her walking away with nothing but her own legal bills. The Aspen house and the Porsche were seized and liquidated by the company to partially cover the stolen funds. She was left exactly as she started, with nothing but her own venom and a pending criminal record. Ryan was a different story. He was a broken man. He didn't fight. He pleaded guilty to every single charge, his confession, a quiet, pathetic whisper in the courtroom. He had lost his mother, his wife, and his entire identity in the span of a few weeks. He had nothing left to lie for. Given his full cooperation and perhaps a father's quiet plea to the DA for leniency, the judge went easy on him. He avoided prison. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation, 2,000 hours of community service, and a court-ordered restitution plan that he would likely be paying for the rest of his life. He lost his job, his money, and his name. He was forced at 40 years old to get a menial job at a logistics warehouse, finally learning the feel of real work on his hands. It wasn't victory. It was just consequences. The board was satisfied. The cancer had been removed, and the company was safe. A few months passed. The Chicago winter had thawed into a cool, hopeful spring. I found myself walking the grounds of the Peterson Freight Depot, the rumble of trucks, a familiar, comforting sound. But I wasn't alone. Beside me walked Dr. Ann Wallace. She had flown in for the quarterly board meeting. We had been talking, hesitant at first, but now, more easily. We were two strangers bound by the ghost of a woman we had both loved in profoundly different ways. She would have been so proud of you, you know. I said, my voice a little rough. What you do, saving lives. Anne smiled, a small, sad smile that was so much like Carol's it made my heart ache. She told me she was proud of you, Anne replied softly. She said you were the only man she'd ever met who had built an empire with his own hands and kept his soul. I had to stop a wave of emotion threatening to overwhelm me. Anne stopped with me, her gaze kind. She had no intention of running the company. Her work, her calling, was in Philadelphia. We had agreed with the board to hire a new professional CEO while she would serve as the new chairwoman, protecting her mother's legacy from afar. She was the smart one, I finally managed to say. She planned all this. She saved her company. And I think she saved me too. Anne looked up at the big blue Peterson Freight logo on the side of the warehouse. She saved all of us, Jake, she said. She gave us a chance to build something new, something based on truth. I looked at her, my daughter, this incredible woman I was just beginning to know. The grief was still there, a dull ache that would never fully go away. But for the first time in a long time, it wasn't the only thing I felt. I felt peace. I felt hope. Carol's legacy wasn't just in steel and concrete. It was right here standing next to me. And it was just beginning. This story teaches us a powerful lesson. A legacy built on deceit and entitlement is a house of cards destined to collapse. True strength isn't just in what you build, but in the wisdom to protect it. Carol's ultimate power wasn't only her incredible capacity for forgiveness, but her clear-eyed understanding that truth, no matter how painful, is the only foundation that endures. Greed and betrayal may have their moment, but they will always be unmasked by the cold, hard facts, proving that integrity is the only inheritance that truly matters. What do you think was Carol's most powerful move, her incredible act of forgiveness 40 years ago, or her final brilliant move in the will? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe that truth always finds a way, please like this video and subscribe for more stories just like this one.